Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Today's guest is Lee Johnson. Lee Johnson is a 49-year-old Air Force veteran, a graduate of the University of Georgia, Go Bulldogs, and currently works as a technical writer for TransUnion. Among his hobbies and personal pursuits are whitewater kayaking, which he's very good at, and I can attest to personally, and World War II reenacting, as well as over-voluntarily divulging too much information on historical subjects, something that people that know me well know that I'm very guilty of as well. Lee participates in such World War II reenactment groups and organizations as the Currahee Military Museum in Toccoa, Georgia, as well as the Commemorative Air Force's annual World War II Days weekend. This year, that was canceled due to the COVID-19. I did have a chance to see Lee a couple of years ago at this event where he was doing some reenactment for Pacific Theater. So he was fighting a group of historical reenactors that were representing the Japanese, and Lee was representing the U.S. Army. He has been involved in these historical reenactments as a way to remember his grandfather, Billy J. Horn, who passed away in 2006. While it has been more than 14 years since his grandfather died, his memory is cherished and still deeply felt by Lee and his entire family. As a man who loved and cared for all of his children and grandchildren as much as he was proud to have served both active and National Guard Army. Billy lived a simple life as an electrician in Rockingham, North Carolina after his brief service in World War II with the 11th Airborne. Some of the things that Lee would like to call out through this conversation is the Commemorative Air Force Dixie Wing located in Peachtree City, Georgia. They are dedicated, as are the rest of the Commemorative Air Force, to preserving the historical aviation legacy from the World War II period, and have several rare still-flying aircraft such as the P-51D, an F-4U Corsair, an SBD Dauntless dive bomber, and a P-63 King Cobra, which took more than 20 years to restore. The Dixie Wing hosts the largest annual World War II reenactment event in Georgia. The Currahee Military Museum and the Stevens County Historical Society in Toccoa, Georgia, maintains a very large collection of memorabilia, weapons, shadow boxes, and displays of the airborne paratroopers who were trained at Camp Toccoa, depicted in the first episode of HBO's Band of Brothers. Some of the books that Lee has in his vast collection, and one in particular is called The Angels, A History of the 11th Airborne Division, 1943 to 1946, by Lieutenant General Edward M. Flanagan. And Lee, thank you so much for your generous time sharing with me. One of the things that I'm trying to do is capture the experiences of grandfathers, but also the experience and what grandfathers have meant to grandchildren. And you have a unique perspective and just how much influence your grandfather had on you. I think part of the thing that we don't always realize is what the impact we have as grandfathers on grandchildren are, or even individual to individual. Something that could be a little bit of a throwaway moment can mean a huge deal to an individual. And certainly grandfathers, magnify that quite a bit. And why don't we get started a little bit about talking, your memories and some of your background about your grandfather.
All right. Well, Greg, thanks for having me on your podcast. So my earliest memories of my grandfather, Billy J. Horn, I grew up I was a little tot back in the 70s. And some of the things I remember him, aside from Christmas, and always just being this warm, kind, just overflowing with love and just all kinds of old anecdotes. And my papa, we called him Papa. He was from Erie, Pennsylvania, and even though he lived most of his life in Rockingham, North Carolina, he was still quite that Yankee. And
carpetbagger, huh?
But he talked with that old time of accent that, from like how people talked back in the 40s and 50s, like, say, what's a big idea? And yeah, he would say, whenever he wanted to chastise me, he said, you think, things like that, kind of like Three Stooges. So he's very old school in his colloquialisms, but that's part of the reason why we loved him so. One vehicle that he had from my early childhood, I still remember to this very day, was a 1972 Volkswagen 914.
Ooh.
And yeah, if you know what that's like, what that is, it's not a Beetle.
Mm-mm.
It's more a sedan type of car.
Right.
But it has the engine in the back, just like the Volkswagen Beetles. But they're very rare. You don't see many of them. I just remember that car so much. I remember how it smelled. I remember how the engine sounded when he would crank that thing up and drive it. And I'd be in the back, playing around in the back while he's driving. Because safety wasn't quite the big stickler as it is now.
Sure.
Oh man, I remember so many. He planted a tree in his backyard. I think it was a sycamore tree it's called the Lee tree. And as far as I know, that tree's still in that backyard of this little, is one of those subdivisions. Actually, pretty an old type of subdivision built like in the 60s, where there's a good bit of land around each house, and plenty of yard for kids to play in. So I remember that too.
Oh, that's awesome. Have you ever gotten curious and looked it up on Google Earth and to see if it's still there?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident it is still there.
Mm-hmm.
I believe my cousins still have that property in their possession.
Okay.
They're three sisters, and it's kind of weird. It's like my mom had 3 sons, and her sister had 3 daughters, and so it kind of balanced out for my papa,
right.
And he got to have 6 grandkids to enjoy.
Wow.
That sycamore tree is still there, and it's gotten pretty big, and it just always, everybody would say, "Oh, that's the Lee tree."
That's kind of a nice thing to have. A lot of times trees are planted in memorial after somebody is gone, but it's nice to have that Lee tree.
Yeah.
So you can enjoy the memory of it being planted and growing and, kind of following along the trajectory of your life as far as, growing out and growing up and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. Talking about it now makes me kind of want to go visit that little house and just see if it's there or not. But anyway, but yeah, Papa was just, he was a lifetime smoker. He smoked from the days I first knew him all the way till the day he died. And he lived 10 years past my grandmother. And my grandmother, her name was Virginia Horn, and she worked in one of those old cotton mills in the Rockingham area that the South back then was very well known to have. And she got what a lot of cotton mill workers would get, which is a brown lung.
Ooh.
And
okay.
And on top of smoking, so she had really bad respiratory problems, COPD and all that, before she died.
That's too bad. Now, one of the things that we had talked about before, discussing your grandfather, was some of the sense of, I think, stability and family traditions and along those lines, if I remember right, especially around Christmas time, because, your grandparents were a little bit a ways. They weren't across the country, but, a couple of states away. And that idea of, hey, when we went up there or they came down, they helped to form that, that Christmas tradition or that feeling when you were younger about, hey, this is what Christmas is.
Yes. Papa and Grandma, they would just, they have all these presents under the Christmas tree. And with my cousins in, I mean, it was just a big family, probably the greatest family bonding experience we had ever.
Sure.
That kind of like provided some measure of continuity amid all the ups and downs and chaos and tragedies of life.
Right.
And that gets thrown at us over the years, But thanks to Papa and Grandma doing what they did with Christmas, I mean, we, my mom throws on a really big Christmas event at her house every year,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, but me and my two other brothers and my sister-in-law, we get together every Christmas. Another thing that Papa left us that is like a family heirloom is this 1925 Lionel train set.
Oh, wow.
It's big scale. I mean, it's very large scale.
Die cast metal, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's I mean, it's like quite an heirloom and memento from that time period. And whenever my brother would take it into a model train shop to get looked at, everybody would just like stare at it. It's just, wow, you don't see many of those that often.
So that was something probably it sounds like from your earliest ages when you were doing Christmas with the grandparents, that train set was always out, right?
Well, actually it wasn't. The story behind that was it was one of the relatives on my grandmother's side. He convinced Papa to let him borrow that train and never gave it back. He kept it for, I would say 40 plus years. But my mom did some finagling and finally made him, made that side of the Brown family return the train. Made sure they didn't forget it. And
sure.
And then it was in bad state of repair, but we managed to take it to a model training shop, and they fixed it. And so we put it out every Christmas. We put that train set around the Christmas tree.
Oh, that's a fantastic memory and great story. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things too that we were talking about was the impact your grandfather had on sharing his hobbies and interests with you, and then just how that stayed with you coming up through your years. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. My grandfather he built me a number of model airplanes and let me have them as a kid. And sometimes they would hang from the ceiling, but more often than not, as a kid, I would get down and play them and then proceed to destroy them because they're models. And, they're fragile plastic models.
Oh,
and but he would work so diligently on these planes. He had a particular table he would work on them, and I remember this back bathroom where he kept all these model kits and how he talked about them. He also, got me interested in aviation thanks to his building all these planes. I've built a couple of planes. I've mostly built like model vehicles from World War II and some other little things, but not quite anywhere near the extent that he's done it. And but I've got quite a collection of acrylic Tamiya paints, and I got kits that I try to make time to work on, and which I have plenty of time right now while we're all under quarantine.
Oh yeah. Well, and I've seen some of your vehicles posts on Facebook and things, and they're just fantastic. And I was a big model airplane guy myself. And one of the things, and I'll just share a little bit, is as I was doing model airplanes, if one of them kind of went askew where, I glued it and the landing gear shifted on me or the seams weren't coming together right, those ended up being candidates for having firecrackers stuck in them and thrown in the backyard.
Nice.
But it's interesting. So was your granddad more of a warbird kind of modeling, or was he like Concords and 707s and civilian aircraft?
Well, totally more warbirds.
Okay.
And he built stuff like P-47. He built P-51. He built a few German planes, a big Stuka dive bomber one time. I remember that plane. It was a Africa Corps with a big, huge snake on the side of it. It was really awesome. I found him a really cool model kit to build when I was still in the Air Force and I was stationed in England. I think I found him a German Bf 110 plane or something like that for him to build, and I sent that back to him, and he really was grateful to get that for me. So about all the planes that he built were gone, but there's one left, and I have it in my bed, and it hangs over my bed. It's a B-17 bomber, and I've done all I can to preserve it, keep it, and the way it was when it used to hang in his living room. So so I'm trying to hold on to that little heirloom of our Papa as well.
Sure. That's awesome. The thing that I find with some of the items that I have from my grandfather is that, I mean, some of them, this one it's plastic. It's going to start to deteriorate after time, becomes a little fragile. And it's hard to both come to grips with that, because there is that sentiment of, hey, this is what I worked on with my grandfather, or I saw, or this is what was meant.
Yeah.
It's always a tough thing, coming to terms with some of that. Now, what were some of the other hobbies and interests and some of the things that lessons learned that you also got from your grandfather?
Well, Papa he definitely wouldn't take crap from other people. And he in fact, he would, his former boss with his electrician company would make him work so many late hours and not be home to raise his daughters and be with his wife that my papa, I don't know if this is one of the best stories to tell you, but my papa did go to after his old boss died, he went out to that graveyard and he took a leak on his grave.
Oh, man. Oh, wow.
And but Papa, was, but, aside from that, and that's just from like dealing with, office politics and dealing with a bad boss. But, Papa was always, we also did a lot of Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So, another Papa tradition that we still try to observe is Papa liked to, for Thanksgiving, he always liked to have those green maraschino olives.
Okay.
Those with a little red pimento in them,
Right.
The type of olives. He always liked to have those. So we always put a bowl of those olives on the Thanksgiving table to remember our Papa.
Yeah.
And for Christmas as well. But other things that Papa did, he's always took really good care of the house, trying to keep it clean, trying to look after take care of vehicles. I try to wash my vehicles, with the same level of dedication and care as my Papa did. And so there's another little thing he rubbed off on me.
Yeah, well, and it's an important lesson to pick up as far as taking care of your stuff, right? I mean, I'm sure he picked that up in his lessons in the Army, as far as keep your equipment clean and in working condition, and the expectation was there, and then a lot of that rolls over into personal life and then gets passed on to the family. So it's always a good lesson to learn, and it's interesting to kind of trace those things back to some of those experiences that our grandfathers had.
Yeah, something. He was also very practical. He would, being an electrician, he was very practical minded about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And one story that's non-World War II related that he would talk about, and I remember him talking about there's something that happened when he was still a boy, growing up in the area of Pennsylvania. So his Aunt Bee had a chicken coop in her backyard, and there was a thief that would come by every so nights and steal one of her chickens.
Ooh.
So Papa rigged up a booby trap for this guy. So there's a door to open the chicken coop. Behind it, he put a log, like a 4 or 5 foot long round log with a good width to it. I don't know how many inches, maybe 8-10 inches width. And he roped it up to where it was horizontal with that door, and then he pulled it back and hooked up a hinge, a latch to it, so that when you open the door, that thing would come loose and fly right at you. So one night, sure enough, that guy came around to steal another chicken, and he opened that door, and he heard from Aunt Bee. All she heard was this, "Ooh!" And this guy getting whacked right in the chest with this log that came swung down and whacked him.
Right.
And he never came back to steal another chicken.
Well, that was, yeah, lesson learned, man. It could get worse. Oh, that's a great story. That's a great story. So, one of the things that we wanted to get into as well, and that we mentioned at the top of the show was, Lee does a lot of work with the Commemorative Air Force and does a lot of World War II reenactment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to talk a little bit more. One, why don't we go ahead and give a little bit of a biography, if you want to, about your grandfather's experience enlisting in the Army, kind of what he did, where his unit was, and then also let's talk a little bit about how that experience has influenced you, some of the people that you guys have met together during some of the reenactment days and some of the reunions at Toccoa, and give us a little bit of that background.
Absolutely. So, the things that I learned about my grandfather's involvement in World War II just came from just little anecdotes he'd share here and there, and over the years that I knew him. And sometimes I would hear him when I was, one experience when I was a little boy was he got a book out and was showing a map of the islands of Leyte and Luzon, the Philippines, and he was describing to my dad the maneuvers and the campaign that went on, and that was like the first really in-depth thing that would talk about that I remember as a kid. But anyway, so getting back to as far as the story of how my grandfather, so he enlisted a little bit younger than you normally should enlist. I think he joined the Army when he was about 17, just turned 18. And so he lied about his age, which wasn't uncommon.
No.
Back in that generation, all the young guys wanted to go out there and fight. And so he went to the Marines, and they turned him down because he was flat-footed. And then so he went to the Army, and so the Army took him, and then they asked him if he wanted to join the Airborne. And so he did, and he got in. So go figure.
Right.
And the Airborne, as we understand it today, back then it was the first elite military unit that was ever put together, a military unit that was very specialized and very dedicated to one specific mission and task. And so as opposed to, today we've got so many different types. We've got the Navy SEALs, we've got Delta Force, we've got all these different special forces type,
right.
units. But so that was very brand new, the Airborne Paratrooper Corps. And so he got in, and so he went to Camp Toccoa, Georgia, right where Mount Currahee is. And in fact, we called when I was a kid, Mom would always call Currahee, that's Papa's mountain, And I never understood why until later on, and that there used to be a big Army camp at the base of that mountain. And in fact, today, if you go on that old country highway right by Currahee, you'll see there's a monument right by the side of the road for all the airborne regiments that were trained there. And then there's a big, huge gate for entrance to the where the Army barracks are located, or used to be located. Sure. And there's actually a few of them that have been rebuilt now through donations and charity. The Currahee Military Museum's been trying to rebuild and recreate the Army barracks that the paratroopers stayed in. And so, yeah, part of their training was to run up Mount Currahee every day. And it's 3 miles up, 3 miles down. I've run it a few times, and it will kick your butt.
Yeah.
And it is serious, intense workout. I mean, I end up, before I get to the top, but by halfway, I'm walking some of it. It's just so, it's so hard to go uphill with that. And then you get to the top, and then you're flying downhill and just banging up your knees really hard, trying to get back down the hill. And they did that once, maybe sometimes twice a day. It's part of their training to weed out the best from the least.
Yeah.
Their training. So that was something that pretty much the rest of the Army didn't do. And there was other types of specialized training, of course, obviously learning how to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. And so he went all that. And then they would go to, after their initial training there at Camp Toccoa, they went to Camp McCall. And Camp McCall was infantry training. And so they were there for several weeks, learning about the strategy and tactics and all the ins and outs of how to handle weapons and when you're going into a combat situation. Then after that, so then this was in the 11th Airborne Division was created on February 25th, 1943. And I'm looking in the beginning of the book of the 11th, the Angels. And so that's when that division was formed. And it was like the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, but he was in another part of that division. But anyway, so they went to Camp McCall, and then after that, they departed, went to the West Coast, by train, and then from there, they got on a troop ship and went all the way to New Guinea, Papua New Guinea.
Wow.
And then there they spent some time getting some jungle warfare training, getting used to being in the South Pacific jungle climates, and which I don't think anybody could ever really get used to, especially if you're fighting in combat. And then from there, they went straight into the invasions of Leyte and Luzon, and so of the Philippines.
Right.
And he was there for several months in the Philippines, and he saw a good bit of combat action. So I remember one of the first stories he ever talked about was when they were on Leyte. If you sometimes you'd hear at night, if you'd be sitting in your foxholes, and sometimes you might have a fight or a skirmish with the Japanese. Then someone might be crying, "Medic, medic!" But you couldn't get out of your foxhole and go help them because the Japanese would often, do that. They would be the ones saying that to lure you out from cover so they could kill you. So lots of times you had to wait until the next morning to go retrieve a wounded, buddy, and lots of times it was too late by then.
Yeah, and one of the things that we often don't think about or maybe put in perspective is that our memories of our grandfathers are these, typically guys that are 60s, 70s, 80s years old. And sometimes it's hard to remember that, in the case of your grandfather, he's 18, 19 years old on those hot ships, no ventilation, bunch of stinky guys, weeks going into New Guinea and then going into the Philippines and then going through that experience, where today, just to put it in perspective, those 18, 19-year-olds typically are at college parties doing what they do, looking at cars and girls, and and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but sometimes I like to compare and contrast a little bit of what our grandfathers had gone through with that experience. So thanks for sharing with that. Now the other thing too is that your father wasn't, or grandfather wasn't involved also with the occupation of Japan and before he rotated home and went into National Guard service. Now, as you got older, and how did you first start to get into the World War II reenactment, and then how did you decide on his, regiment, and lack of a better word, wearing his colors versus the guys from the Big Red One or the 82nd or the 101st or, some of these other, maybe, these other units?
Absolutely. So I always had kind of a leaning towards that time period, it being in World War II. And as far as like a time of history, it's always been interesting to me to learn about, understand it, why it happened, what's the repercussions of it. But even before I did reenacting, I guess I always had, I had some predisposition towards it. I was already involved in swing dancing. So my grandfather, I forgot to tell you, under the hobby set that you asked about, he was also a trumpeter in a big band as a young man. And he took that trumpet with him when he was in the Army. So he loved big band music. And so I got into swing dancing after really after my college years because there was a place that used to be in Atlanta that called Swingers, and it's not the Swingers people have a it's a notorious for it was a swing dance club.
Sure.
Anyway, I just gravitated more because I like doing that more than going to a nightclub with blasting overwhelming and techno music that's where you can't even talk to anybody.
Right.
And what I love about swing dancing, you dance with the girl, you get to know her, and you at least get to know her name before she goes on to dance with somebody else. So and it's just I love the classic sound of it, and it had a little bit of a resurgence back in the '90s with like Harry Connick and the Big Bad Voodoo Daddies and Cherry Poppin' Daddies and other neo swing dance bands that came into being back then. But no, I got into World War II reenacting. It really the seeds were definitely sowed when my mom started getting me to go with her to the World War II, the Airborne Reunion events down in Toccoa, Georgia. They'd have once every year. And this has been going on for, I guess, at least 20 plus years. Every October, first weekend of every October in Toccoa, they'll get together the remaining living airborne veterans and just honor them and do a lot of events for them. They have a 10K run up Mount Currahee, and they have a parade and a lot of events at the Currahee Military Museum. And this whole commemoration of the airborne divisions actually really got sparked off in the late '90s with the HBO series Band of Brothers and with Saving Private Ryan. I think those really started like a big surge in World War II reenacting from those productions. I thought it was kind of silly at first, but then I have this picture of my grandfather giving an autograph to a reenactor at the one year he came to Toccoa. It was in 2005, I believe, and it's on that folder on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture now. Reenactor with his jump gear and everything, and your dad, signing the autograph book or whatever he had in his hand at the time.
Yeah, seeing how these other reenactors are doing, and and it just kind of like dawned on me, well, why am I not doing that? And so I just felt kind of, I don't want to say weird doing it, but after my grandfather died, I don't know, it left a vacuum in me that he's no longer around. So there's something that needed to be done to kind of remember him by. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up getting into World War II reenacting after that. And I've done a little bit of stage acting back in my day in college, and I've done it in the past. So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like cosplay. Well, it is kind of like cosplay, but it's more of a historical purpose. And so I started getting all the gear. You go to these different websites like At the Front, and to get the basic stuff you need and the accessories. Mm-hmm. And the real big ambitious commitment dive deep into this hobby of reenacting happened when I got the M1 Garand rifle from it for it. And I had to go over to Gadsden, Alabama. That's where the Civilian Marksman Program is located, and they sell surplus M1 Garands. So yeah, you can. I think that they still do that, but yeah, M1s are a lot harder to. I bought mine back in 2007, and since then they've become a lot harder to acquire. Yeah. And but then I just been at, and then as the years go by, I just add a few more pieces to the impression. I've got my fatigues, and then I've also got my dress khaki. It's great to wear for swing dance events. Sure. And because I love to see a guy in uniform, even though if you're not really in the military.
Yeah. Well, and that great story too, because it's one of those things, and I can tell that it's one way to keep your grandfather still actively with you. Our grandfathers, once they pass, they're with us in our hearts and our memories, but then sometimes those activities we used to do with them, those activities that they would share with us, kind of drift off. But I got to imagine that when you've got that 11th Airborne hat on and the jacket with the insignia and the blouse and everything else going, that's got to bring back active memories about that, and not just the World War II stuff, right? So, I mean, because that was a small part of a very large life, but it's those memories that come back, those lessons learned, those drives in a truck, seeing the Porsche 914. All those things have got to come back to you when you've got that stuff on, or going through the closet, getting prepared for a weekend or something along those lines.
Yeah. This is another World War II story, and this is one of my favorite Papa stories. So at Camp McCall, at infantry training, after they got done with Camp Toccoa, so Papa had the duty of playing taps one night, and right at the end of the duty day. He had this bugle that was made of plastic. I kid you not. He said that because of the metal shortages and the rationing during World War II, the Army issued these plastic bugles that made just a horrible, awful sound. He hated it. So what he did is he broke out his trumpet and he played taps on his trumpet. It made made a really wonderful sound as he played it. And after he got done finishing taps, he was getting ready to call it a night. And then all of a sudden, the base commander shows up in his bathrobe. He goes, "Private, you just play taps?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, and the commander said, "In 10 minutes, I want you to play it again."
Okay.
Yeah, because he liked it. He wanted to hear it again.
Oh, all right. He just wanted to hear it again. I didn't know if there was some kind of reason, like he missed it or something, or he made such a great sound playing on his trumpet. The base commander was just like, "What the heck?" Well, especially if all you're used to is hearing like a kazoo playing it.
Yeah.
Hey, Lee, hang on the line after we wrap this up, but I just wanted to thank you again so much for coming on and sharing your experiences and the impact that your grandfather had on you. I mean, it's very obvious that his impact was huge on your life. Everything from the Lee tree to the models to the Christmas and Thanksgiving traditions, all the way up to what you're doing now with the World War II reenactment. It's just, and that's really what this community and this podcast is about, is bringing to the forefront the impact that grandfathers have on grandkids. And it's little stuff, it's big stuff, it's everything in between. And so really appreciate you sharing that with us.
All right. Thank you for taking the time, Greg.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.